Early hours of one July morning, 4 men set out on a journey. A journey that would end their lives and the lives of many more. How could they do this? How could 4 citizens of this country do this to their own homeland, to their own fellow citizens? What went into the building of such a degree of hatred and contempt for human life? Their journey ended in violent self-destruction. Our journey begins with the questions. Where do we go from here? What do we do to stop this happening again? Lasting solutions can only be based on a proper understanding of the problems. And so it is that we must try to understand even those things that cannot be excused. If we can defeat the reasons for the inexcusable can be defeated too. Terrorism is not something new. Acts of random violence in which innocents suffer are not new. Many peoples and nations have had to endure terror. The means and methods of terrorism have adapted to modern technology, but its motives and manners are unchanged. Prejudice, intolerance, impatient contempt for others, and utter disregard for the sanctity of human life. In this sense, terrorists can attempt to hijack any philosophical or political ideal, any religion or way of life, any noble cause whatever, and pervert it in order to justify the resort to random acts of violence. However benign or compassionate, however high-minded a cultural tradition may be, there is no guarantee that it will not be hijacked by a perverted few in their determination to excuse the inexcusable. Having said that, most people would agree that the world has entered a new phase since 9/11. The events of that day symbolize what has now become worldwide terrorism. And the agents of this terrorism not only call themselves Muslim, they also claim that their faith allows such acts. Some of them even claim that their faith prescribes such acts. How incomprehensible a claim that is. For Islam is a faith whose very name means peace. A faith that commands peaceful relations with all, regardless of creed or race or nationality. A faith that tells us that life was created out of compassion. A faith that states that the unjust killing of one person is like the killing of all humankind, and that the punishment for it is hell. A faith that from the first called for interreligious dialogue and understanding. O people of the book, come to an agreement between us. A faith whose prophet said, I am sent as a mercy, not as a curse on humankind. Islam is a faith that celebrates the diversity of peoples as one manifestation of God's infinite attributes and a source of richness and blessing. Its scripture teaches us, O mankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes that you may know one another, not that you may hate one another. What an absurdity it is that a faith centered on peace and compassion is associated by terrorists with their commitment to destruction and death. But the radicalized attitudes behind terrorism are capable of hijacking any faith in order to justify the unjustifiable. The terror is senseless and indiscriminate, and all are victims, including Muslims. Muslims are just as exposed to the danger of terrorist acts as are all. However, in the West, Muslims are also the primary victims of the backlash, of religious hate, crime, and public contempt. They suffer the indignity of being associated with barbaric violence, and at times are even expected to apologize for crimes with which they have no association whatever. In fact, terrorism is not rooted in any one religion or race or cultural tradition. The only common characteristic of terrorism is that it pursues its goals through indiscriminate violence. Terrorism does not recognize the inherent value of life, and, being blinded by hatred and rancor, it is incapable of rational thought. There are certain conditions that give rise to hatred and rancor. Over time, and manipulated by misguided people, these conditions can lead to radicalization and nourish terrorist attitudes and rhetoric. In the case of the worldwide terrorism we now face, we can point to a number of conditions as particularly relevant. In the early part of the last century, many peoples engaged in national struggles for independence. Among Muslim populations, Islam was used as a means of motivating people to take up the fight for freedom from foreign occupation. In this way, Islamic identity came to be associated with national or political identity and with patriotic pride. But when these peoples achieved independence as nation-states, they felt betrayed by their new rulers. The new rulers separated themselves from their people. They did not govern for the benefit of the common people or in their interest. They ignored local traditions and ways of life, just as they neglected the people's basic economic and political needs. For the disillusioned masses, Islam became a source of solace and strength, and an argument against their rulers. In this way, Islam became politicized. It became narrower and detached from its moral and spiritual responsibilities. Even now, in this 21st century, many countries and regions in the Muslim world are still ruled by dictatorial regimes. The leaders distrust and disregard their own people, concentrating their energies instead on preserving and strengthening their hold on power. They keep the people under control by restricting education, social progress, and basic freedoms. This intensifies the hatred and animosity the people feel towards their rulers. The people, long deprived and humiliated, are all too easily persuaded that the rich West is to blame for their plight. A substantial number of people in Muslim countries believe that foreign powers are responsible for supporting, protecting, and even installing the ruling elites and dictatorships they suffer from. They therefore blame these foreign powers for much of the deprivation and humiliation they endure. The root of terrorism is not religion or race or nationality. Rather, terrorism finds it easier to develop in the midst of this threefold deprivation. Firstly, a lack of rounded, effective education. Secondly, a lack of basic social and human rights. And thirdly, the lack of opportunity to integrate and interact positively with the wider world. Combined with powerlessness to improve these conditions, such deprivation leads to hopelessness, then resentment and anger that whoever can be blamed. In the hands of terrorists and radicals, this turns into prejudice, hatred, and repugnance towards the West. Evidently, such feelings and perceptions were powerful enough to have permeated the minds and hearts of those British citizens who planned and committed the outrages of 7/7. However well-educated and well-off these citizens may have been themselves, they were nonetheless influenced and affected by the rhetoric which claimed to voice the despair of the Muslim world. lasting solutions can only be based on a proper understanding of the problems. If the root problem is rightly identified as backwardness, poverty and isolation, the answer surely lies in sustained efforts to provide opportunities for education, social justice and dialogue. Now let us turn our attention to a community of volunteers, numbering millions in Turkey and abroad, who are seeking to do just that. Volunteers who are inspired by the likes of the 13th century mystical poet, Yunus Emre, who said, "We love the created because of the Creator." The great Sufi master, Jalal el-Din Rumi, who said, "With one foot grounded firmly in Islam, I move like a compass among all the other different communities." And today, Fethullah Gulen, an Islamic scholar and peace activist who teaches, "Be so tolerant that your bosom becomes wide like the ocean. Become inspired with faith and love of human beings. Let there be no troubled souls to whom you do not offer a hand, and about whom you remain unconcerned." Literally millions have been motivated by Fethullah Gulen's positive message of love, peace, education and dialogue. Through his sermons and lectures, his writings and other activities, he has taught a whole generation in Turkey and abroad. Motivated by his teaching, the volunteers have established hundreds of schools in over 80 countries, including Pakistan, Bangladesh and India. Many students, inspired by Fethullah Gulen, have trained as teachers in order to be able to serve in these schools. Once graduated, they travel to different parts of the world, far from home, to educate future generations. These schools are non-denominational and follow the national curriculum of the country in which they are based. They strive to combine academic excellence with the instruction of sound morals. Through the good example of teachers and other staff, these schools try to instill in students universal values such as honesty, fairness, humility, respect for others, tolerance, responsibility, cooperativeness, and compassion. These schools take pride in bringing together students from different backgrounds, faiths, and cultures. For example, in northern Iraq, 6 such schools have been running since 1999. In these schools, Sunni, Shia, and Kurdish Iraqis study together the same syllabus in the same classrooms. Zamboanga, on the southern Philippine island of Mindanao, there is another such school called the Philippine Turkish School of Tolerance. It was founded in 1995 in this very turbulent region, where the population is about half Muslim and half Christian. The school functions as an oasis of peace, with Christian and Muslim students learning side by side. In addition to the schools, Fethullah Gulen has been encouraging the community of volunteers to engage in interfaith and intercultural dialogue. He has personally set a good example by meeting with faith leaders to establish bonds of friendship. Among the distinguished leaders he has met in the 1990s are the late Pope John Paul II at the Vatican, the late John O'Connor, Archbishop of New York, Leon Levi, former president of the Jewish Anti-Defamation League, the Patriarch of the Turkish Orthodox Church, the Patriarch of the Turkish Armenian community, and the Chief Rabbi of the Turkish Jewish community. As a result of Gulen's efforts, hundreds of dialogue associations and charities have been founded all over the world. Through these charities, the volunteers come together with people of different faiths and cultural traditions. When the 9/11 attacks took place, Fethullah Gulen was one of the first Islamic scholars to step forward and unequivocally condemn such acts. He said, "Terror can never be used in the name of Islam or for the sake of any Islamic end. Acts such as random killing, suicide bombings and kidnappings are completely forbidden in Islam and can never be undertaken whatever the circumstance or condition. Those who kill one innocent person through such acts are considered in Islam to have killed the whole of humankind. A terrorist cannot be a Muslim, and a Muslim cannot be a terrorist. A Muslim can only be the representative and symbol of peace, well-being and prosperity." To help share the message of peace and love which they believe is at the heart of Islam, this community of volunteers have founded, as well as hundreds of schools across the world, an international TV channel, a daily newspaper with the highest circulation in Turkey, a number of periodicals in different languages, and various interfaith platforms and think tanks. This community is not a post-9/11 phenomenon. It does not represent a reactive effort. Rather, it is a proactive movement that has continued its service for over half a century. It is an example of how people can work together, individually and collectively, to eradicate distrust, hatred and prejudice, and nurture in their place mutual respect and understanding, and a loving tolerance. In the early hours of one morning, 4 teachers set off on a journey that would change their lives forever, and the lives of many more.